Hello, this is Paul Saunders. Thank you for joining us again today for another episode of the Three Questions podcast. I'm really thrilled today to have with me Dr. Vanessa Neumann. Dr. Neumann is the founder and head of a consulting firm called Asymmetrica, PhD from Columbia University, a very distinguished background as a thinker, a representative of the interim president, Juan Guaidó of Venezuela in the UK and Ireland. Also, and somebody with I think a very long and distinguished background as a thinker and as an analyst on Latin America. And we're just really excited to have you with us here today. Thank you. And we're going to talk about Venezuela, big
Thank you.
topic in the news.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be on, and I really appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the work that the National Interest does and the Center for the National Interest do, and I appreciate that you care about Venezuela. You know, the more people understand the issues and the different perspectives, because there are many different perspectives, the better for the country of my birth.
Oh, absolutely. And, actually, one of the things that we really want to do with the National Interest as a publication is to help Americans understand the rest of the world. And Venezuela isn't just the rest of the world. It's really kind of a neighbor in a lot of ways. So I think a very important topic for us. We're talking here on Friday, January 9th. We're at this point several days after this rather daring, U.S. operation to go into Caracas and grab Nicolás Maduro and sort of haul him to jail in New York and put him on trial. It looks sort of increasingly clear that the Trump administration is not really planning to try to press for a really significant political transition in Venezuela, notwithstanding a lot of prior expressions of concern about the regime. They seem to have made a calculation that they want to keep that regime in place and use sanctions and a blockade as sort of leverage over the Venezuelan leadership, and also to dangle these kind of economic incentives of really helping the country to develop as a way to encourage collaboration. Do you think this is going to work? Is it a sustainable approach? Just as I look at that, I kind of worry that if they kind of succeed in really helping Venezuela to prosper, it's going to be very challenging to maintain the same level of influence that the administration hopes to have. And conversely, if they don't succeed, it sort of creates a whole different set of challenges, which are also really difficult to sustain in different ways. And, I know very, very little about Venezuela. You know an enormous amount about Venezuela. I would just really welcome your thoughts on whether this can work.
Thank you for that. That's a wonderfully informed and cogent introduction. I think, first of all, Trump is correct in saying that a lot of the Venezuelan oil industry was originally developed by the Americans, particularly the Rockefeller family. So a lot of the first well was actually drilled by the Brits, and then after that, the Americans. And so there's a huge swath of the old guard of Venezuelan sort of upper class, the business people who are related to Americans because they came down. There were some other friends of mine were like the lawyers to the Rockefellers. The other one was the banker. The other one married, a cousin of the Rockefellers. And there's the Phelps family, and there's all of these other families who, even though the oil was never in the hands of Venezuelan families. Let's get that straight. Because of that, I get a lot of this information on that. It was always first in the hands of foreign companies, and then it was, I believe, 1976, it was nationalized and became PDVSA. And then it was run quite effectively, still with a lot of the foreign-trained executives still running it, right? These are just hardcore oil people with a very international perspective. Slowly, as it got more and more politicized, corruption crept in through the 80s. You had so many foreign banks coming in to lend money to PDVSA that they would literally write notes on the backs of napkins to each company while having a 2 bottles of whiskey steak lunch, which is how you sort of see big deals. So then there was money flowing in all directions with poor accounts being kept. That led to corruption. That led to some mismanagement, especially as different presidents and political appointees got that. And then, of course, that led to a sense of economic decay and led to what gave rise to Chavismo. The fact that there was a lot of money, but it wasn't lifting all boats. It was only lifting a few government-related boats, right? And then what happened after that was in 2002, under Hugo Chavez, they rose up, they froze production trying to get Chavez out because they were in disagreement with Chavez. Chavez took the FAFO view of mess about, the F stands for mess about,
Right.
and find
Right.
out. And said, and then stacked it with soldiers, right, with people who were loyal to him. From then on, the decline accelerated, and Venezuela can't produce enough oil. And then came other issues. First issues were corruption and incompetence and kleptocracy. After that came the sanctions and the diluents and all of that. And then, of course, the blockade. Now, I think that President Trump does have a path forward that can work on this. And the reason I say that is because this type of take the goodies away, stick them in a basket and say, give us democracy. You get this when you have a transition with a truly representative government and a prosperity and a governance plan that spreads the prosperity to the people. And it's really not rocket science. I mean, what the people need, and if you travel outside Caracas, in Caracas, you have Ferrari dealerships and restaurants hung from the sky and whatever, with 3 Michelin stars. And then you have 80% of the people who have less than a meal a day. And if you travel outside Caracas, people don't have families are breaking down because you have broken down roads. The phone doesn't work. You don't have electricity. So the machines in the hospitals don't work. So what this needs to do to be effective is that the Trump administration and Delcy Rodriguez coincide, or the Maduristas coincide in one mission, which is to increase the production of Venezuela and get it working again and get it prosperous again. The United States, I guess, wants this because Venezuela is not just about oil, it's also about natural gas, gold, uranium, and a lot of critical minerals. Oil is just the opening gambit, but it also has more natural gas than Qatar, which has not even been exploited at all. So once you get what Venezuela really needs and is to get rid of PDVSA, it's an empty shell, and have a hydrocarbons ministry that invites the joint ventures, which I hope is the way that the Trump administration is going. Now, to your point, if this starts to work and the Trump administration, and this was Marco Rubio's point, can then take this oil and sell it at market, because if the United States is selling it, it gets market prices. As I said, I think yesterday, and when I lived in London, I knew some of the traders who were doing illegal trading. I'm not the only one who knows who they are, but they were.
Well, right.
I met a couple of them. So unsurprisingly, they come through London. And they told me, listen, it's actually a really tough business because the Maduristas, you'd pay up front and then the Maduristas wouldn't deliver. And then there'd be no oil. So they would then not pay until after they got the delivery, putting financial pressure on the Maduristas. Then because it was sanctioned and in poor condition, they got less than 50% of the market price. It was a very difficult business for the Maduro regime. And then it was also then delivering oil to China for billions and billions in debt that it needed to service, now at this lower price, which means that servicing of debt was longer. So they really didn't have it easy in terms of the oil. So I don't mean to feel, I'm not saying that just for anyone to feel sorry for them because they're human rights abusing, kleptocrats. But I say that to highlight that they have this incentive to do this and to get this permission from Trump, and that's where they are aligned. Trump's perspective is the national interest, which is secure the Western Hemisphere, was stated in the national security strategy, purge it of the adversaries who are using it as a staging platform, China, Russia, and Iran, which I've been writing about since 2006, and then and secure supply chains, right? And I'm thrilled that what Western Hemisphere is the number one priority in this national security strategy. I've been waiting for this moment for 20 years. It is the number one source of drugs, immigration, and trade for the United States. It's about friggin' time that we give it this priority. So
there are pluses and minuses to being a top American priority, but your point is well taken.
Yes, exactly. Well, beware what you wish for, kind of thing.
Right.
This plan of financial blockade, offering a way out of the blockade as a precondition and taking some of that money and putting it in a fund, was discussed in 2017. I know because I was in the room. I floated it as an idea, and others said, yeah, we've done something similar in other countries, and it has worked in other countries, including in Latin America. I believe their example was Peru. So it can be done, where you say, and Chile has, there are differences, but it's not a completely madcap idea at all. And then the question is how it's executed. The good thing is I do trust Marco Rubio because he does know the region. He knows what he's doing. He's not some blogger, not to name anybody, but he's not some blogger who came out of the blogosphere and just decided, oh, I know a little bit about Latin America. Or, I went to Cancun on holiday and I know the region. He does.
Right.
Whether you agree with his positions or not, he's knowledgeable and he's clear on the issues. So there are various plans. I know because I know I spread one around, and I'm presuming others did as well. And I know we had a Plan País when I was working with Guaidó about how to rebuild Venezuela, what you did, 0 to 30, 60 to 90. But that was just anticipating an interim presidency that was really controlled by the opposition, right? Not this with Delcy Rodriguez. Now, it could work, and I really, really hope it does work. And I do think it is going to take a while because we do need the United States for stabilization. I think that Diosdado Cabello is an easy one. She's going to try and challenge Delcy because he won't be happy about this. And he's what we call 4F, which means from the 4th of February of 1992, the coup attempt by Chavez, even 6 years before he even won the presidency, 7 years before he took it. And so therefore is a hardcore warrior as well as a narco. But he's on the wanted list. So the United States can execute on its capture order for Diosdado Cabello if he generates more problems than he's solving. He's supposed to keep security and keep it together. The Venezuelan opposition does not have that capacity. They don't have the military background. They don't have the military relationships. There are some in exile that do, but that's the sort of Trump's thinking, right? And Delcy is a top negotiator. The international financial community knows her well. I have listened in on, phone calls with her where she has said, we want to do this, we want to do that, whether it's, bond holders or the 2020 PDVSA bond and other people who then turned around and put pressure on London, Washington, and other places, right? So she's been at this for a long time. And I think that the capture of Maduro was sort of one of the conditions of this negotiated transition, right? It gives Trump a win, it's very flashy. And to be clear, maybe to anticipate another question, yeah, Venezuelans are really happy about it. They're really happy about seeing Maduro captured. But let's get to that in a second. The paths to failure for this, or where this might get stuck, is if the United States, and this is a fear of Venezuelan, is so happy doing business with Delcy that they kind of forget about the democratic transition, right? And then, Diosdado steps out of line, they pluck him out, but, then things later tick along. We have seen some improvement. At the start of the week, there was nothing on the table about freeing political prisoners. Last night, they were talking about freeing political prisoners. Some of them were freed, not all of them. The lives of Venezuelans were not under discussion on Monday. Here on Friday now, they are. That bodes well. And for this to work, also Venezuelans want to feel that there's an improvement to their lives, not just financially, but in terms of less repression. Right now, you can be tortured to death for a tweet. So if the United States wants to be seen as the trusted partner it was back in the Rockefeller period, where the farms and the farms worked and the supermarkets were full and the roadways got built and the electricity worked and we had like the best, buildings in Latin America. We were sort of an icon of modern architecture and development and all of, and all of that. Then this needs to be part of the plan. And then you will have the long-term trust even without so much threat of violence. So that it offers sort of an off-ramp for that building trust, which is also, making friends, which is also in the national security strategy. Where it goes wrong and it's complicated for the opposition, like Maria Corina Machado, who's now apparently going to Washington, D.C. next week, and Trump will meet with her. The reason is she's worried, and rightfully so, because if she's sidelined for a long time and then she she's the one who brings stability and prosperity, guess who the people are going to love? The one who brought stability and prosperity. And if you have 2 years down the road, people are like, wow, my lights are on, there's food on my plate, and I'm walking my dog in the street rather than eating it, then even if you have a free and fair election, that's the person who's going to win. So Maria Corina Machado has the love of the Venezuelan people at the moment. And that's why she wants to be part of this transition. And she will make the argument that she wants to kind of negotiate with them. Now, Delcy will have said, no, we're not dealing with her. But, given the negotiations with Trump, there is a path in for her, but it's got to be sort of Marco Rubio's agreement to this. And it's really a Marco Rubio who's running Venezuela. So that's the path. So Maria Corina Machado wants to represent the Venezuelan people who voted for her, be part of this transition, and that remains to be seen whether that will happen. Because if she isn't, and Trump has already talked about future elections, which means they're not recognizing Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo Gonzalez's win. Because if you talk to Venezuelan people, they're like, what do you mean new elections? We just did them. So that's the challenge that she's having. It depends how we go. Having said that, anybody who is more or less reasonable has long accepted that, Chavismo is here to stay in Venezuela in one way or another as a movement. Despite even if 75% of the people voted against Maduro, there will always be some people. They rose for a reason. Who feel that they've been marginalized, whether it's the color of their skin, their socioeconomic class, their geography, and believe in this revolutionary ideology. It's connected to Castrismo. It's connected to FARC, the Liberation Army of National Liberation Army, the ELN of Colombia. They're linked operationally and ideologically, and like there are manifestos and meetings on this. It's not a question of, it's not up for debate. They say it themselves. So I think it would be interesting. That will always remain, and you will have to accept that and play to that. There is no purging the movement. What you want to do is purge the malign influence, purge the repression, purge the deep narcotics involvement. And if you can do that, have an all Venezuelan feel represented in their system, have a parliament and mayors and governors that, are truly elected by the people and therefore a mixed bag. I mean, like you have in the US, right? I mean, that's what representative is. It's a big bag.
Sure, right, right.
Better than these two systems where it's like one's all opposition and one is all dictatorship. That doesn't work. So we'll have to see. There are some good plans. They were first discussed in 2017, and they just need to get those plans off the shelf, update them with some meetings with very clever Venezuelan diaspora, not just the political elite. Don't forget, Venezuela has a lot of people who are extremely intelligent, very well prepared, and are out in the world. And they're running companies like BP, Google, just to name two personal friends of mine in the diaspora, sovereign wealth funds. All of that talent is waiting to be asked to have their input. And that, I think that's a valuable resource, because there is mission alignment.
Well, we will certainly all here in the United States be keeping our fingers crossed for the people of Venezuela, and hope that the administration will do a good job managing its piece of all of this. And thank you, by the way, for that just very thoughtful, nuanced, comprehensive answer there. I think that was really helpful for people in getting a clear picture of the background and the dynamics and what's going on and why, and particularly this question of whether or not it can work.
Well,
Now,
that's the advantage of a podcast rather than an interview.
yeah,
We can have
right,
fun with
right.
this, right? We can have fun with the
No,
details.
absolutely,
We can get into it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Can really talk a little bit. You touched on kind of Venezuelans being sort of really thrilled at Maduro being removed.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that, at least in some cases, that might also translate into a little bit of gratitude toward the United States, and possibly even toward President Trump, who, to his credit, has done something very bold that I'm not sure that another American president would have really seriously considered
Right.
as a policy option. So he's unquestionably done something really, really daring, and it worked.
And it
at
worked,
least
yeah.
in
Well,
it.
somebody asked me in an interview, like, if
Yeah.
the Americans go in to remove Maduro, will it work? I'm like, yeah, it will, because it's the United States.
Right, right.
This is
So
what the U.S. does
it's
best.
kind of
Go in, pluck out, and we're done.
right,
Be home in time
right,
for dinner.
right. I mean, to their credit, and obviously to the credit of the intelligence and military personnel
Yeah.
who ultimately had to carry the whole thing off. It seems to have really gone flawlessly. I guess now we're like today, as we're talking, we're almost a week out from this.
Yeah.
By the time the podcast is live, it'll be a few days later. Our views toward this ouster and toward the United States evolving. Do you think that they're going to evolve? What's your sense?
Well, they are evolving, and there is overwhelmingly a sense of delight that Maduro is gone. And there are a number of different perspectives again on this, right? So there's delight that Maduro is gone. Even another school mother who is a senior executive at one of the world's great companies, who's Venezuelan, said, "Oh my God, Vanessa, we have to go and have a chat about this." The sight of him being taken out was incredible. For the Venezuelans, it was like,
it was really
oh
remarkable, I have to say, and this, frankly, kind of humiliating picture of him in the gray jumpsuit and the tracksuit, and sunglasses with the water bottle. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah. I mean, the very next, when it was happening, or just after it happened, in the first interviews, I said, it reminds me of Abimael Guzman, who was the captured leader of the Shining Path. When they were captured, they put him in a cage in the middle of Lima so that people could see that this God who, functioned and controlled everything, and people were afraid, and he was up in the mountains, is a human who, has bodily needs and eats and, smells or whatever. And then it said, oh my God. And so for Venezuelans, it was the psychological effect that this person who was all controlling, all powerful, terrorizing of the people could face justice and be presented to a courtroom like anybody else. And by the way, anybody else except Venezuelans, right? He is getting a due process in the United States that he does not grant his own people in his own country. Everybody's just imprisoned, no trial, no hearing. Friends of mine have turned up severely beaten to so-called hearing arraignments without a lawyer, and then died, a few hours later. Me and everybody else. We all
That's horrible.
This has happened
That's just horrible.
to many people. So even if he is having rights that Venezuelans don't get at home. So again, another credit to the United States system. So I think the psychological effect has been powerful, and as I rightly predicted, a lot of other countries who like to say, "Oh, blah, 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 this is terrible. Oh, we're in agreement. The U.S. should not intervene." If you ask the people of those countries if they're happy, the approval rating's really high. I mean, there's something like 70% of Colombians, which is a country next door, are delighted at the capture. Why? Because Maduro was a problem for the region. We have 9 million refugees. The bulk of those are neighboring countries. I mean, you had an outflow of immigrants that makes all these welfare systems creak and throughout the region. And they don't want this hassle. They just want a nice, quiet neighbor to do business with. Colombia and Brazil were actually left-wing governments. The people were delighted, and as not just the right winger of Argentina and Malay. So I think that has changed the view. The view of the United States is a trustworthy partner is a complicated one. It is a trustworthy partner because it executes, right? It says we're going to do something, and it's not like, oh, we're going to put it to a vote to the UN, and we're going to wait for the, European Parliament and the European Commission to back us up as well. It just acts. So when it says it's going to act, it acts. That makes it reliable. What worries Venezuelans and what makes it potentially unreliable is hey, how long do I have to live under a dictatorship still while this all gets going? Because the reality on the ground is they're still capturing people. And they captured a lot of people. 44 people were detained just a few days ago. Yesterday, a few were released. But we're used to seeing this in Venezuela. It's like what do you call it? The rotating door,
Revolving door.
revolving door.
Right.
Revolving door of political
Mhm.
prisoners. We're letting those guys out, but these are the new ones. The Americans only get head up when it's American citizens, which I understand. That's the national interest. The view of the United States is trustworthy because it's effective, trustworthy because it brought down this, all-powerful God. Remains to be seen whether that prosperity and freedom is actually brought to bear for more Venezuelans.
My third and final question here, I want to kind of zoom out a little bit. And we've had this kind of 60-year-long national obsession with Cuba and policy toward Cuba and Castro and the Cuban regime. As you were talking, by the way, about all of these, the long American presence in Venezuela, I was remembering that many years ago, I wrote a book review of an autobiography that our former House Speaker Tom DeLay wrote. And DeLay, in his book, he kind of relates how his father actually worked in the oil industry in Venezuela. And things were starting to become kind of very uncertain there. And his father stayed on sort of to wrap things up while he and his mother and perhaps a sibling, I don't recall the story that well, were kind of sent back to the United States. And on the way back, their plane has a stopover in Cuba, and the family, actually, all the Americans on the flight end up being detained in this hangar by Cuban revolutionaries because the revolution in Cuba is like happening right then.
Oh my God.
And it was clearly for him as a tween or young teen or something like that, a very traumatic experience and something that's really
He was on the plane?
impactful. Yeah. He was
Oh,
on this
wow.
plane, and he and his mother, and I think there may have been a sibling, they got held in this hangar for like a day or something by very hostile and unpleasant Cuban revolutionaries who, by the way, didn't really realize he actually spoke a little bit of Spanish and could sort of tell what they were saying about his mother, for example, and
Right.
other things. It was a very traumatic experience for him. coming back, there is this kind of linkage between the ideology, but the revolutions, the history, all of that. But also, Venezuela certainly has been helping to prop up Cuba, which even with that help has been, I think, struggling pretty mightily to keep everything together. And it's not clear that they're entirely successful in keeping everything together, but that's one of those things that is sort of successful until it isn't, if you know what I mean. So what are the implications of this pathway that you have laid out in Venezuela? What does that mean for Cuba? Can that government stay in charge? Is the United States going to aim its sights next at them? Certainly for Secretary Rubio, who you suggested has had kind of a leading role in a lot of this. Cuba has been a very top foreign policy priority for a long time. How do you see the Cuba file playing out?
Full disclosure, I've been to Cuba a couple of times, and I've met a couple of people within the regime, and I know how they think. They were at the time seeking sort of actually closer ties with the U.S. on their terms, of course. They want economic prosperity because they were worried about the economic decay of Venezuela. Cuba is a parasite state. It just cannot, it doesn't work economically on its own. The only thing that works really is its tourism industry, which is actually broadly controlled by the military, right, who basically are very involved in the hotels. So the tourism industry helps prop up the dictatorship there. And the dictatorship's brutal. Like in Venezuela, you have torture centers, there is no freedom of speech. There is a little bit of economic freedom. Like if you go, you can eat at a restaurant that's owned by, it's a small business, right? So you can have like 6 or 8 tables, but it's really out of someone's home kind of thing. So it's not a big enterprise, but, and they have a few little bits and pieces like that. But really, they've always lived off first the American, the casinos, the hotels, the tourism, right? And when you had the mob and all of that, we've all seen The Godfather. And then they refer to the fall of the Soviet Union as the special period. They said, the special period was very hard for us. And they tried to do what they could to produce things domestically, right? Their medicines and all of that. And, some people tell you it's fabulous. I'll tell you it's not. But that's a discussion better held elsewhere. But they're going to have a hard time surviving on their own. What this will do is pull the rug out from under them, in that the blockade will not allow oil to Cuba unless, of course, perhaps they also want to come into line. We have not heard that out of the Trump administration. No such statements have been made. But I can tell you from having worked in it that we can't expect that. Looking down the line, give it a couple of months, and then we can we'll start to hear statements that, and you too, Cuba, can realign this in this direction rather than the other direction.
I mean, if you can blockade Venezuela, you can blockade Cuba,
easy
by the
peasy.
way. I mean, and unlike 1962, it's not obvious that anybody else would try to break the blockade, right? I mean,
no. Well, that's the thing. That's a remarkable thing. Lots of people say, Russia and China will step in and defend Maduro. I'm like, no, they're not. No, China has much bigger interests with profitable financial interests throughout the rest of the region. Let's go back to what I said before. Most of the region consider whatever they may say to their people who elected them, they considered Maduro a problem for the region. So as I said, secretly, they're all happy. China's doesn't want to be associated with that problem because they've got bigger fish to fry in Brazil, especially, Colombia, Argentina. So they don't want that headache. They'll issue some strongly worded statements and leave it at that. And also they want to renegotiate their debt, which is they've always wanted that. They're still in debt, and they would be like, hey, dude, like Repsol here in Spain, I'm based in Madrid, they were sanctioned for being a friend of the regime. And they're like, hey, we have 2.8 billion in debt. If we play nice, can we get repaid too? Everybody's coming out of the woodwork. on this.
Well, I mean, everybody who holds Venezuelan debt, I would imagine, may think they have a much better shot at getting it paid back than
And get exactly.
for a
So
long time.
for a
Yeah.
long time, and that includes China, and Russia is a little busy right now, and I suspect to be clear, I have no direct intelligence on this, or evidence of this, but we all suspect, anyone who's a well-informed Venezuela watcher, that Venezuela versus Ukraine is a bit of a negotiation. Putin is getting more of Ukraine than Zelensky wants to give, and Russia will get some trolls online, and I have trolls, and everybody has trolls, and then, some Russian bots and a few strongly worded statements, but they're in no position to help. And one of the things that has been highlighted, by the way, when I did India Today last week was one of my interviews, they were sort of delighted that Chinese weaponry basically failed. The Americans came along and just switched that puppy off. That was it. So the Chinese weaponry was not to be trusted. That was a point being made by the Indians, who of course have their own reason for their interest in that subject. So I think, yeah, Cuba, if Venezuela is alone, ultimately, which if you were paying attention, we could correctly anticipate, I did and others did, then Cuba will especially be alone. And then what you might see is also seeing a little bit of shaking in Nicaragua, because they're also aligned with Venezuela. And if there's stronger drug enforcement and enforcement on those flows, you might see a lot of Central America also have some political changes. So President Trump's statements are sometimes a bit colorful, but the strategy is not pulled out of a hat overnight. There are some very, very smart people who have been thinking about this for a long time, and there are some that involved who can be trusted to execute effectively, pending, we don't go bombing many other countries. like Nigeria
Well,
or something,
yeah,
Venezuela saw Nigeria and said, oh no, Venezuela said, oh no, there we go.
you're
We've
right.
got to the
Right, right,
bottom of the
right.
list. But
I mean, it certainly shows what, or suggests, I guess I should say, what can be accomplished by people who are prepared to sort of break the mold and think a little bit outside of the box. But thank you so much. Again, this is Dr. Vanessa Neumann of Asymmetric, the consulting firm. Really very, very impressive expert on Venezuela, and had a really great conversation today. I think very deep and rich. I have a lot of questions left. Maybe we can, catch up as we get a little bit further down the road with this whole
yeah,
experiment here,
I think
and
I
see
think
how
we'll
you think
still
it's
have
going.
lots to discuss. I think we'll have
I
lots to
imagine
discuss. We're
so.
not going
I
to run out
imagine
of
so.
subjects. I think this will still be interesting 3 months from now,
I'm sure you're right. I'm sure you're right. So thank you so much for doing it. Thank you to our listeners for joining in for another episode of Three Questions, and we'll be back again soon.
And thank you very much for having me. Thanks for listening in. Thank you.